Okay, and once it's set up, I will share the link so you guys can confirm if you can see it now. Okay, so I pasted it in the chat, so you can check the link out to see if everything is fine and keep track of it maybe. So let me also put it here like I did. Okay, that's your code. Okay, this is your code. Okay, I'm trying to get the YouTube stream so that I can be watching it the way I was watching it yesterday as well. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is your code basically. Sorry guys, I need to. So basically, this is your code. So what you are doing, like you said before, for the correct array, where is that? So this is the correct array. So you were checking if if number input equals correct array. That can never be equal because you can't compare, because the type of user input is what? Is a string, right? Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
So it's more like you are comparing to see if a string is equal to an array. They can't be equal in any way.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you need to use is the method I showed you yesterday, the includes method. So instead of saying number user input equals this is what you should have done. If, and I don't know about the other parts of the code, but at least let me just attend to this. Includes, includes this. So this is what you want to do. So you are checking if correct array includes this, and you remember this from yesterday now. So basically this will return true or false, depending on the fact that whether or not user input is already existing inside of the correct array. So this is what you should, more like what I have here. Let me minimize this. Even if I have the same array like I have here, I have on this stuff. So even if it's the very same array, I have, and I'm trying to check if it's both of them are equal. So so you can see it says false, right? And it's even the same value having two of them, but they are not equal. So you get the point. And the reason why this is like this is because of something I told you guys to check a couple of maybe weeks ago, when I told you to check the difference between heap and stack. I don't know if you remember the heap and stack in JavaScript. Did anybody try that? I did mention this. I don't know if anybody read about it when I told you to read about it.
Yes, sir.
Did you read about it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what did you find out when you read about it? And Laura? Hello?
I'm here, sir. Sorry.
You said you read about it, so I said, what did you find out when you read about it?
Yeah, just trying to go. Okay. So heap is the memory where objects are stored when we define a variable, while a stack is what holds the function that is called. So like when a function is called, it is pushed to the top of a stack, while a heap is just like a place where an object is stored when a variable is defined.
Okay.
That's what I read.
Yeah, let me go to sketchpad basically. So you're actually correct. Just that it's not just objects stored on the heap. We also have arrays stored on the heap. So let me show you more like a graphical illustration of more made a diagrammatic illustration of that. So basically, when you create primitive data types, when you create variables as primitive data types, they get stored in something called the stack. So the stack is just more like a shelf. So let's say you have three variables. One is x, the other is y, and the other is z. So they get primitive data types basically get stored on the stack. So this is the stack. That's terrible handwriting. So this is the stack. Meanwhile, the heap is not like something stacked on top of each other like this. The heap is just more like a piece of land, more like, just imagine it that way. That whenever you create objects or arrays, it just occupies a space on the heap. So the difference, one of the primary differences between the heap and the stack is that the heap, is a more temporary kind of memory. So this is basically an easily accessible memory, and that's why when you start doing core programming and you start thinking about things like memory optimization, you realize that it is actually easier to reference primitive data types when you store them in variables than for you to reference objects and arrays, because where the object and array are stored are actually farther compared to where the stack exists, and the stack is where you have primitive data types. So what do I mean by all of this? So whenever you create a variable, it occupies a particular location on the heap. So this can be your object A, this can be your array B, this can be your object C and array D. This person that is staying upstairs, I don't know what is always grinding. Okay, so can you guys hear that?
Yes, sir. The noise is too much.
Is
that
don't know, I just hope it's not grinding human being. Okay, so this is the heap. That's a joke. So this is the heap. So whenever you store object or array, it gets stored on the heap. So but the thing is that on the stack, what you have on the stack is basically the name of your primitive data types, or the value of your primitive data types, as well as the reference to the object stored on the heap or the array stored on the heap. So whenever you have an array stored on the heap, a reference for that particular array will be created on the stack. So if you have object A now, the address, that is the address to object A in memory, will be stored on the stack. I don't know if that's clear. What I explained so far is clear. Hello?
Please come again, sir.
Can come again.
Okay. But you understand what I mean by primitive data types being stored on the stack? More like whenever I store different primitive data types, they just get stacked on top of each other, on what is called a stack in the memory. You get the point? For only primitive data types. But when you save object or arrays, they get stored on the heap, and the heap is less is not as accessible as the stack. That is, whenever you want to look for something or reference something on the heap, it takes a longer time compared to your primitive data types. And you might not necessarily be seeing the implication of that now because you are still writing very simple programs. But at the moment, just understand the fact that primitive data types get stored on the stack, while non-primitive data types get stored on the heap. So in order for you to be able to access what you have on it, because the heap does not have a specific, doesn't have a specific arrangement like you have on the stack. The stack is just visualize a shelf where you have your TV, your radio set, your DVD, and so on top of each other. So variables get stacked on top of each other in the order of how you create them. So when you create a variable inside of the heap, what happens basically is that JavaScript will save a reference, which is basically the address of this particular variable, which is an object or an array. Or let's just say an object for the sake of staying on one part, staying on one thing. So let's say this is the object you created on the heap. It could also be an array, of course. So what JavaScript will do is going to store a reference for that on the stack. Do you get it? So it stores a reference for it on the stack, so that whenever you try to use that particular object, let's say this object C, the address on the stack is how you will find it on the heap. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello?
Sorry, you said the address from the stack is how we find it on the heap.
Yeah.
That's the reference from
The
the
reference is
array.
basically like an address. It's going to be more like an address. It could be, okay, number 17, Akim Shoba and they close, that kind of thing. So that's basically the address of the object on the heap, because like I said, the heap does not have any specific arrangement. So in order for you to be able to find the elements you create on the heap, you have to have a reference to it. So that reference is stored on the stack. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's why when we do something like, let's say, let's array 3, and I say array 3 equals array 1. Are you getting it? And I say console.log. So let me come back to this side. So you can see we have array 3, and let me just write a label beside it in the console so that you can see what I'm doing. So we are actually logging array 3 into the console. So let's go over to array 1 and say array 1 dot pop. And you can see what happened to array 3 as well. We popped the last element of array 1, but yet you can see that the array 3 actually gets popped as well. Do you get the point? Hello? Hello, did you see what I just did?
Please, can you do it again?
Okay.
Please.
So I have array 1, and let me remove array 2 basically. So I hope it's clear when I told you that these two will not be equal to each other. So that's still the point I'm trying to drive home. So we have array 1, and let me call this array 2 instead of array 3. Let me just call it array 2 since we don't have array 2 anymore. So okay, we have array 1, and I assigned array, I called array 2. So I declared another variable here, array 2, and I said assign the value of array 1 to array 2. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now what I popped is array 1, and yet when I console.log array 2, you see that whatever I did on array 1 still affected array 2. Because as far as JavaScript is concerned, it still references the same particular element in memory. Do you get the point? It doesn't go over to recreate a new array. When I assign a new array, it's what it just does is it creates a new variable and assigns the same object I created. The address of that object on the heap is what it assigns to array 2 as well, so that whatever I do to array 1 affects array 2 down the line. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me see, just to make this clear. Say so here you can see we have John. So let me see. So you can see what is happening here, because basically it will reference the same item in memory. So in as much as you are assigning and reassigning, it doesn't still, it doesn't do anything to that, original variable. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me do something like this now. Name 1.2. So you can see that name 1.2 uppercase, this operation does not affect name 2, right? Hello? 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 Can anybody?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, can
Yes, sir.
anybody explain why that, why this doesn't affect name 1? Hello?
What did you say? Can you come again, sir?
You have assigned name 2 to, you have assigned it to name 2.
So why is this value not working? Like to uppercase, of course, to uppercase is supposed to turn this to a capital letter, right? Turn it to all caps, to capital letters. So remember, and I'm just saying this to kind of draw your mind back. It's because this is a primitive data type and you cannot alter primitive data types. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so even if I do
Yes, sir.
log name one, it still shouldn't make it uppercase. You get the point. The only way I can do this is when I create a new variable and assign this new value. Maybe lesson name 3, and assign that new value of that is already in uppercase format to this. And you can see it's already John now. And you can see that now I easily detached this particular, what's it called? This particular variable from the originating variable, which is name1. So now at this point, name1 is now different from name3. Does that make sense? But that's not the same case when we have our array here, because in our array here we have a memory value that is being stored on the heap, and then it's not being stored on the stack. So what is just stored on the stack is the reference. So whatever you do to the originating variable, it doesn't matter how many times you assign that originating variable to many other things, it's still going to affect it along the line. Does that make sense? Because it references the same object or the same array in memory. So understand the fact that objects and arrays are stored on the heap while primitive data types are stored on the stack. Does that make sense? And for variables stored on the heap, what you have is a reference to them on the stack. And whenever you assign those variables to newer variables, it still references the same object on the heap. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so still spend more time reading about heap and stack. So that's why I told you to read about it the last time. And the truth is that you don't actually have to know these things. But when you start writing code, and Jesus Christ of Nazareth, when you start writing different kinds of programs, you will be running into problems. And the reason why you run into those problems basically is because of this. Do you get the point? Because you don't understand how this works, and because you don't understand how it works, you will always be like, why is this thing not working? Why is it not changing the value and so on? Just understand the fact that for an object that you reassign to a new variable, it references the same thing still. Does that make sense? And along the line, we'll see how we can actually solve that problem for good, so that you don't end up having the same object referenced over and over. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, one more time I invite you to read about the heap and the stack. Hello. Okay. So what are you guys with me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what I was going to show you guys yesterday was basically about data structure, and then basic data structures. So that's basically a deeper delve into arrays and objects. So basically I realized that there's still a little learning we have to do on those two things, and then I will just have to go over them again. Then we'll go over some additional array methods. And did any one of you go through the array methods I said you should go through yesterday? Look here, I'm inspecting the prototype. Hello? Hello? Nobody? Can you guys hear me?
I'm still on it, sir.
Okay. But did you try to?
Yes, I did.
What did you find out? I didn't find anything. Okay, that's fine. So, but I believe at this point everybody's conversant with the idea of primitive data types, right? The primitive data types we have, what they are, because they are basically simple, and they are easy to actually, they are easily to identify and use. So primitive data types, are just basically single values like strings, numbers, boolean values. Then we have unassigned value, null undefined, right? So those are the primitive data basically. So for the numbers, we know we have things like 2, 3, 4, blah blah blah, whatever it is. Then for strings, we know we have something like John, and the way you write strings is that you put them inside quotation sign. You get the point. So that's for string and numbers. So for, okay, let me just put it. So we have 2, for instance, 2, 3, 4, and these are in JavaScript. So every valid number you would use in mathematics. So this is a valid string, as when you have something like hello or so a person's name, as long as it is wrapped in a quotation sign, it is a string. So now you have true or false values, then you have a boolean. Then we also have null and undefined, and those are basically empty values that don't hold any kind of value and don't hold any kind of value whatsoever. So you use them to check for emptiness. So let's say you are expecting a value, and if you want to know if that value doesn't exist, you want to compare it to undefined, or you want to compare it to null. You understand what I'm talking about? So when you basically said something like if maybe x equals undefined, so you are expecting the fact that there's a possibility that the value of x might not exist. So you check for, it's possible to check for things like this when you are not sure if that value will be coming. So but these are basically the primitive data types. That means they are simple as data types can get. So you just understand 2, 3, 4 numbers, hello or whatever string you have inside of a quotation sign are referred to as strings. True or false values as booleans, and we have not undefined, which are empty values basically. So do you guys understand all of that, right? You get that? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's do let's take a deeper delve on data structures. And what we are looking at basically is arrays. So for arrays are an object. So basically here's what we have for arrays, and here's what we have for objects. So let me just disable this. Let me leave it. Okay. So we have arrays. Arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. But basically what you want to do is you want to store a sequence of value inside of a single variable. And you can see we've already started working with arrays, but I just feel it's important that we kind of go over it again. So an array, first of all, it's very important that you understand that an array is iteratable. You can iterate over arrays. You get? That means to iterate over something means you can actually perform repetitive actions on that particular element over and over again. Do you get the point? So just more like most of the things we did with array, more like saying for when we say while this is that or something like that, you will see a couple of other things that you can only perform on arrays. You get the point? You can't perform it on objects. For instance, when we have let's say an object like a string, like let's say let my string, so say hello world, and I want to say for let I equal 0, and while I was going to write while, so while I equals when you want to do this, and you could basically do this with an array. And the reason why you could try this with a string is because the string has a length property. So you could try this, but there are different kind of array methods that when you begin to use them, you can actually try whatever you try with an array with a string. So when I save this, for instance, you can see that it kind of locks down everything inside of the string, and it iterates over the string. So when I talk about iteration, they are very complex kind of iterations. You want to do that. It's beyond just checking something against the length of something else, and trying to find out trying to do a couple of other things with it. So here now, let's say for instance you can't necessarily do something like maybe for after every iteration you can't do my string dot push. Definitely. You know why you can't do that? Hello? And you can see the error we have in the console here. The reason why you can't do my string dot push is because the method push is not available on the prototype of a string type of data. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You know that most of the methods we use on array are available in the prototype of the array. I remember what I said about primitive data types. One of the basic things we said is that they don't have their own prototype, right? And I said the reason why we could use some kind of methods on strings is because of autoboxing of primitive types. Can anybody remember what we said about autoboxing of primitive types? Or does anybody remember the concept at all when we talked about it? Hello? Does anybody remember? If you can, just say no, it's fine. Okay. So what I said about autoboxing of primitive types is that is somebody trying to say something? Okay. When we talked about autoboxing of
Like I remember from
okay.
what you said, like from autoboxing, was that um most most often, or like JavaScript tends to like convert, or um I don't know what the word is, like convert. Let me I think convert is the right word. Like convert, um I'm just, how do I put it now? That makes um or maybe I should use an example. If that works.
Okay, just try any which way. If it's not correct,
I'm trying to like the right word
is it convert or
to
wrap
use.
or enclose?
And something like that.
Okay. So basically, what autoboxing? Thank you very much, Doctor. So what autoboxing does is that primitive data types don't have their own constructor. That is, they don't have methods. So what happens is that whenever you create a string or some kind of primitive data types that can be autoboxed, an object is created for them in JavaScript, and then they are wrapped inside of
Mm,
that object. So more like, and I showed you something like, let's my string 2 for instance be equal to new, and I use the string keyword, and this is how we created the string. You get the point? And if I do console.log my string 2 and save that. Okay, I'm still pushing here, so let's stop pushing. So let's say console.log. So you can see one actually has one looks kind of it has a prototype around it, like has a prototype and has its own constructor and all of these other things. Sorry, has its own methods attached to it. Now you can see that, but technically everything you have available inside of this constructor of the string you created using this method will also be accessible by this ordinary primitive string that you created. And the reason why that happens is because by default JavaScript will always wrap ordinary strings inside of this constructor so that you can have access to all of these methods that are available to it. Does that make sense? So whether I do this or not, I still have access to string methods, but by default primitive data types don't have their own methods. Is that clear? Hello?
yes, sir.
Okay. So let's go over to our data structure. So unlike primitive data types where you just assign a value and it's as easy as that. So for arrays, let's create a new array now. So we can say let my array be equal to, what is that? Let's say 1, 2, sorry. And we can even say John. We can store all sorts of value inside of the array, and not just that, we can also decide to store what's it called? We can also decide to store even objects inside of the array, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. But let me just show you the fact that you can actually store another array inside of this array. So we can do one 10, 11, 12. Do you get the point? So basically what an array makes available for you is that you can actually store series of data inside of a collection of what you have inside of this square brackets, and at the end of the day you can reference this particular array as one particular object. Does that make sense? As one value or one element. Do you get it? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Are you guys with me at all? Okay guys, please, you can turn on your camera now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but is it not clear? Or you guys are just tired?
I'm following you.
Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Is it? Okay, thank you. So here we have now we have the array. So basically when we have things like string, when you say things like let my name equal John and so on, what you have is that you have a limitation in that regard, because in the world of programming, you will be dealing with a more complex kind of data, not just ordinary names. Like, okay, somebody's name, somebody's age stored in different places. So for instance, take your Facebook profile for instance. Do you think the way your profile is being stored on Facebook is that they will say let name equal this, let this equal this? No, they have to store you as one entity on the Facebook database. Does that make sense? That means you have to look for a data structure that can contain all of your information in one place. Do you get it? So, and if you want that kind of data structure, you can't be talking about strings or booleans or so on. Definitely they will need a data structure that will be able to accommodate boolean values, that will be able to accommodate string values, that will be able to accommodate all sorts of values, because there are some information about you that can only be stored in an array. Like your friends, for instance, you don't have one friend, you have many friends. So you understand what I'm talking about? So your friends will have to be a collection. So you have to be able to keep them in an array, for instance, just for example. And you understand that in a bit. Or maybe your marital status. Your marital status can be a string, for instance, and it can and it can't stand alone on its own. Okay, let's say for instance, I have John, name John, and I have let's marital status, and I say marital status is false. Okay, a marital status, let's say married. And I say is it marital status, or let me just say let's write it in programming terms, is married. That's how you write it instead. So is married, let's make is married a boolean value. So let's say is married is true. So technically, so if I have let's say more than one user, for instance, definitely you understand that I can't create is married two times in the same program. I've already referenced that variable. I have to look for another name to call it, right? Hello?
Yeah.
So in order for us to be able to make the most of our program, we have to be able to collate data together and create one data point for a collection of data that pertains to a particular person or a particular user or a particular item. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is it clear?
Yes.
So that's why you have complex data structures like array, and objects, so that you can be able to do some sophisticated things whenever your program demands them. For instance, you are creating a social media application. You can't be keeping your user information inside single variables like this. You have to be able to store them. You have to have one point where you can store all of these kind of variables. Do you get the point? And that's what necessitates the subject of objects and array. So arrays will store a collection of items separated by a comma. So there's no limit to what you can store in an array, and an array can have can be as long as you want, as long as you possibly want it to be. So you can definitely, there's always a restriction in terms of memory space, but definitely by default you can actually store as many things as possible. You probably will never exhaust the limit of what you need to store in an array in terms of memory space. So you can store different sequence of data inside of your array in JavaScript. So, and that's what we are just doing here. So we have 1 2 3 4, we have a string, we have boolean values, we have null, undefined, then we even have another array inside of the array. Then another thing is we can take it a step further and even have an object inside of the array and say John. Do you get the point? So we have an array and we have a whole lot of data types inside of the array. One single value now. We don't have two different values. So in this case now, let's say this first number represents something specific to this John user. This second number represents something specific to this John user, and the string John is John's name, and then this is John's marital status, and this is the number of number of degrees that John has, and it is null because it is not applicable because he hasn't gone to school to bag a degree yet. And this is possibly the number of books he has in his library. He probably has more books than you can actually realize, or maybe he doesn't even have what looks like book. Maybe he just has sheets of paper around. But this is just basically information that you can relate to a particular item in your program. So it saves you the stress of creating new variable for every single thing you have to use. So you create one variable and you store a couple of other data inside of it. So that's one relevance of an array. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is there any question? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. We are here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So are you getting the point?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So I said the relevance of data types like complex data structures like arrays and objects is so that you can have one data point and relate a whole lot of other information inside of that single data point. So that way you are not actually restricted. You can create other similar kind of data without being confined to the fact that you cannot, unlike when we just do maybe my name inside of our program, and we are not storing it inside a container like maybe a data with structure like arrays. For instance, when you say my name is John, you cannot declare my name again in your program. But when you have something like arrays and objects, you can actually declare your different people's name or different users name, just using different data points in terms of complex data structures. Does that make sense? Yeah, and here we can go on to log 3 of them inside of the console, and we see all of them still. So you will see all of them, and they're actually similar now. So our program is almost useless now. So this is basically what an array is like. You can store different kinds of data and then consolidate it to one value by creating a value, then making that value an array. So that's that. So for let me bring one back. So that's that for arrays. Then for objects is actually also similar. You can store a whole lot of things inside a single object. So let's say let my object be equal to. So you can see the fact that for arrays we use these square brackets, but for objects you don't use square brackets, you use curly braces like this. And then while an array is a collection of a sequence of data, an object is a collection of property value pairs. So this is one object, and that object, let's say, could be it could be anything. It could be a car, it could be a user, it could be anything whatsoever. There's no limitation as to what you can create an object for, what kind of entity you can create an object for. So you can create it for virtually anything. So what I mean by it is a collection of property value pairs that inside of the curly brace, what you just have will be property and values pertaining to this particular object, so that using this object you can actually reference the properties inside of it. So let's say the first property is name, and then name will hold the value of John Wick. Then we have age, and then age will be a value of 37. And then we have what's it called, we have email, and we have John, and that's also a string at week.com. Then we have let's say that's all we have. So let's say this is, instead of saying my object, so let's just say this is user 1. So you can do the same thing for a different user, and you can say your user 2 is going to be Jaden Smith, and then it's going to be 27, and then it's going to be Jaden at Smith. So .com. So this is a typical way of actually referencing data points. Like you don't want to just say my name, my let's name my name or whatever it is. my name be equal to John Wick. Once you do something like this now, in as much as you have more users to go over, the moment you do this, you are limited because you can't ever use the my name variable again. You've used it and you've used it. So how do you now create name for a different kind of user? So that means you have to be able to wrap each user inside of a more complex data structure like an object to be able to declare name for each one of them, age for each one of them, and address for each one of them. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you can see here we are getting identifier name has already been declared. So we've already declared my name, so we can't declare my name 2 times. So the best way to go about it is to wrap it inside, of a more complex data structure like an object, and begin to reference whatever properties we need to reference inside of that complex data structure. Makes sense, right? Hello? Hello?
But you've not done it.
Eh?
So if I can get it very correctly, you said that we have to wrap this data inside a more complex data structure, right?
Yeah.
So does that mean that we'll be redeclaring another variable?
Okay, here's what I mean. For instance, this name John Wick we have here. Primarily, when we're doing primitive data types, we didn't do anything like in object form like this. What we would do is do something like let's my name, right? If that's correct, I would say let my name be equal to what's that? John Wick. This is what we did for the most part. Isn't that correct? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So the challenge here is definitely you will not be building your application or your product for just one user. You are building your product for several different users. You get the point. So how do you ensure that you have different users and then you are able to use the same variable name to reference different users without having conflict in variable names like this? Because the moment you declare this my name again, because you want every user to have a name, and it's ridiculous to now say okay, because you have already declared a name here like this and you want to say my name too, and so for a real application you don't want to do this because you want to be able to have the same name referencing every similar data, every similar value. You get the point. So let my name be the same for all properties of a particular object instance. So what you want to do, because you cannot declare variables like this as such. Okay, let's say you even have the freedom to declare names severally like this. Let's say you still have to declare age. So you say my age equals 30, and then you now say let my age again be equal to 44. So how do you know whose person's age is this, and how do you know whose person's age is this? Does that make sense? You can't tell which John what name belongs to. Do you get the point?
So it's like wrapping one user to a container that contains their own information, right?
Yes, that's what the object does for you. So you can now have a collection of property and value. Property is the label for the value. You get the point. The value is what you have on the right hand side. The label for that value is your property. So name has a value, and the value of name is John Wick. So instead of declaring it like this, which will become a conflict later on, we wrap it inside a complex data structure like an object. An object is a complex data structure, so that we can have different users and use the same identifier to reference their values. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this
Yes,
is the complex data structure I'm talking about, and an object can be as it can be as massive as you need it to be, because you won't believe if you see your the object that represents you in the Facebook database is going to be crazy. You get the point, because all of your friends will have to be related to it. All of everything you store on Facebook, all your images will have to be referenced on that particular object. Just think about that. But it's not possible for you to actually have pictures all over the place, and you can't even relate which picture belongs to who. You have to be able to collate them together and have a single data point to reference each one of them. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's what I mean by complex data structure. So an array allows you store. So there are different things you store in arrays that you don't want to store in objects. So there are specific times when an array is what you need, and there are specific times when an object is what you need, and you can't actually tell which one is, you know, more useful, because inside of arrays you can have objects, and inside of objects you can have arrays. So let's say, for instance, here we can say friends, and here we are building our little social media application. So we can say first friend is Bosse, and then the second friend is Jide, and I'm not tribalistic. Let's say the other one is Chidema, and then the other one is Danjuma. Danjuma. Okay, so you can see we have arrays here, and JavaScript is not going to complain, because if I do a console.log user1 and I save it, you can actually see that we have that user here now. I can see that the user has, you know, an age, has a name, and has friends. You get the point? And you can see that, you know, everything is properly structured. You get the point? And anywhere in my program, I can easily say, okay, let's say this is let's say this is the name of this user is Yetunde, and the name of this other user is Precious. You get the point? So there will be no conflict whatsoever. I can reference Yetunde dot name, and it just brings the name. Okay, your name is not say, yeah, okay, Yetunde dot name is John Wick, but that's what we stored inside of it by the way. You get the point? But you understand what I mean now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically,
Yeah.
because there's a property on the Yetunde object, we can access it using the dot notation. That's what I mean. So whenever I see a dot connecting two values together like that, that means the value on the right hand side is a property of the value of the left hand side. And whenever you reference it like this, the value of that property will be returned to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the dot notation is not the only way you can reference values in you know, in an object. You can also use this bracket notation and target the name, and then it's going to return the very same thing to you. See, there's no difference. It still returns the name, and I can also decide to target the age, and then it returns the age. You get the point? And that's it really. And I can do the same thing for Precious just by changing the you know, object name, and it returns for Precious. And I can also get the name for Precious. So you can see now that we actually have, and you know, Yetunde and Precious are actually, you know, have the same name by the reason of the definition of our object, but that's fine. So you can see we have the bracket notation referencing the object and property. Then we also have the dot notation, and the most common basically is the dot notation, and I think that it's easier to read this one.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a property defined in an object, let's say we want to do address, it will say what? It is undefined, because you haven't defined anything as such inside of your object. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I actually have a meeting for 8 o'clock. Jesus Christ. I believe it has started. Okay, so what I want you to do basically now is I just want I want to go over some array methods with you, and let me quickly join the meeting on one side, and I'll come back to the call. The meeting is impromptu.
Okay.
Hold on, please. Hello.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Good evening, sir. Fine, sir. Fine, thank you, sir. Fine, sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. I'll see what I can do, sir. Thank you, sir. How is everybody, sir? Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Okay, I just realized that the meeting is going to be starting by 8:30, so I still have some time to spend here. So okay, so that's it basically. So you understand what I mean by arrays and objects now. So let me just kind of relate. Okay, now we see an object inside of an array inside of an object. So we could also have objects inside of an array. So let's just do something quickly. And what do we do? Let's combine what we've learned, right from what we learned yesterday with what we are doing now. So we can say, okay, we have an array and let that be this array. So let me just say my array and let me remove every other thing inside of the array. Technically, you won't be having arrays like this that have just haphazard data types. You don't want to have that in your program. So let's just save this and let's do a console.log of my array. And please, guys, if you don't understand what I'm doing, just let me know. So we can say my array dot push, and guess what I'm trying to push in? I'm trying to push in Yetunde into the array, and when I save now, you will see that okay, now we have one object inside of our array, and it is the person of Yetunde, and then we can also do my array dot push again, and then we can push in Precious as well. So we have two elements inside of our array now, and then it is Yetunde and Precious, both their objects are now inside of our array. Does that make sense? So you can see now that even arrays can contain objects. So you can put objects, nest arrays inside of objects, and you can nest objects inside of arrays. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, so the overview is clear now. So we can now, I can go into specifics with array because I want to show you some array methods extra. So before, we go over objects and then we start doing some other things with them. Because I actually had to push you forward to make you do those exercises you were doing, and you will appreciate them by the time we are able to do some other additional things that we are doing. Because basically if you pay attention to most of the things we are doing, technically we should start doing DOM manipulation maybe in the next 2 classes, because let's say from next week we shouldn't spend all of the time we have over these stuff, because I think I've actually covered everything that you need to know about most of the basics of JavaScript, and not just the basics, even the advanced concepts. Just I haven't taught you things like higher order functions, higher order array methods, and then maybe some special kind of syntax that were introduced with the later versions of JavaScript, but that's fine. But at the moment, let's go over arrays, and then let's see what will happen with working on arrays. Does that make sense? So I will keep all of these guys here. So let's create another array and call it methods array. So we want to use different array methods for this particular array. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See, it looks like the array of an impatient person. So yesterday, can anybody remind us the methods we learned yesterday, and just one that you can remember from top of your head?
We talk about concat.
Yeah, what does it do?
Said that it helps to combine 2 array together without modifying the existing one.
Yeah, more like it creates a copy of 2 existing arrays and merge them together. So that's what concat does. Yeah, so that's correct. So which other one did we learn? So Yetunde has remembered concat. Okay, so which other one? I will call your names. Hello, who is by the name of Terminal? Okay, Omiebi. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so Precious, you were in the class yesterday.
I was in the class, but I didn't stay to the end though. My battery went down.
And you
So
didn't
it's
have to
off.
stay till the end to get the array methods we learned. We learned a couple of array methods. You didn't have to stay till the end. So okay, let me just go over it without wasting time because I don't have all the time tonight. So we have pop, right? What does pop do? You can remember now. Oh yeah, now fast answer now. Hello. Okay, pop.
Last element in the array and
yeah, that's correct. What about on shift?
That's a new element to become a array.
Remove the element to begin with. Okay. What about index of?
Let's get index of an array. We start from 0.
Yeah. So it does what, please? I didn't get that.
Get the index of an array now. And it starts from 0.
It doesn't get the index of an array, it gets the index of an element.
It gets the index of the element.
Yeah. So basically, you want to pass in the element whose index you are trying to look for here. So whatever element you pass in here, if that element doesn't exist in the array, what does it do?
Returns minus.
Yeah, -1, not minus. So please read about all of these things. So we also have includes, right? What does includes do?
It checks if the array has like specific elements.
Yeah, so you pass in an element. So it returns, what does it return? True or false? Okay.
True or false.
Yeah. Going back to pop, what does pop return to you?
Pop returns the element.
Returns the length of
like the returns the element that last element that was removed.
Okay, yeah. Pop returns the last element that was removed. Yeah. Last element. So that was our repeating student from yesterday, right? So then we also have push. What does push do?
It adds
push
one of
element.
Yeah.
To the end of the array.
Yeah. So well done, guys. So I think the issue, and you should understand this. Like most of the times when you're coding, don't try to memorize anything. Just try to understand as much as you can. You know, the thing is that like even the simplest method sometimes, like maybe like array dot, maybe is one very common method that I use every time. Sometimes for me to be able to use it, I just have to go on Google and learn a video, kind of just go and check how they write it again, because the goal is not to memorize all of the syntax. The goal is to be able to understand the syntax, because when you understand the syntax, it is very important that you know what you need more than for you to know, what every syntax is and what the meaning of everything is. You can know all the array methods and you don't even know which one you need to apply in this particular case. I don't know if you get my point. So don't go after trying to memorize them. So don't be intimidated when you can't list everything. But you can actually see the fact that the moment I began to list them, you can actually recall what they do, right? And that should be your primary goal. So the way memorization comes is that as you keep using them over and over, you end up knowing them even without having to go and reference anything. But never be ashamed of going to reference things when you've forgotten them. Never be ashamed. Yeah. So the common saying is that good developers are actually very excellent Google searchers. Yeah. So it's one of the skill sets you need for you to even know. Like the answers are always online, but for you to be able to know that this is what I need is a very big challenge. And when you know that this is what you need, for you to be able to tell Google and phrase it correctly, that's another language language skill you need to learn entirely to be a programmer. So there's another array method, and that is shifts. So let's just begin to target our array. Any other one, or did we do any other one yesterday? Let me just scroll up and check. So splice. Okay. Can anybody tell me splice and slice? What does splice do?
Splice helps to remove a specific element in an array.
Yeah. So while pop removes the last one, on shift removes the first one. Splice can actually target a particular element, and then the second parameter of splice does what? What is the second parameter? We have two parameters, two arguments that we pass in. So the first argument is the index, right, of what you want to remove, and the second parameter is what? The number of things you want to remove, right? So
Yes,
by default,
yes,
it will
yes.
remove just one. So you record that now. So for splice, what does splice do? It just kind of brings a copy of an existing array. Sorry, slice. So more like you have a start index, and then you have an end index, right? So basically, you can say, okay, you want a copy of the array from this point to this point. That's what slice does for you. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to do methods array. So let's do console.log. Okay, let's try something else. So let's say okay, let's not do that. Okay. So let's say methods array dot shift, and shift does something similar to what pop does. That's what I was trying to remember yesterday, but I forgot. So you can do this dot shift, and what it does is that when you do console.log methods array now, it removes the first element. Do you get? So shift is the opposite of pop. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? While do you get that now? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you remember when I told you, like, I'm going to take you back a little bit now. I said whenever you I said methods are what exactly? What do methods signify in JavaScript, especially when it comes to object property relationships? Hello? How do you define an object? Sorry, how do you define a method rather? Yeah, a method.
Well,
Method. Okay.
okay, so we can go.
No, go on.
Okay, from my understanding, methods are actions that can be performed on objects.
They are what?
So far, there are actions that can be performed on objects.
Yeah, on objects. Yeah, technically, yeah. Yetunde, you also wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted just something to say similar to what she just said, but maybe in my own language. Like methods, they're the one that define what an object is supposed to do. Like it gives a function to an object.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you, Omiabi. Thank you, Yetunde. So what I said, and let me repeat it again. So in as much as you guys are correct, but the ultimate definition of a method is when the property of an object has the type of a function. The value of the property of an object has the type of a function. Does that make sense? So let's say here we've declared some objects up here. So we have Precious and Yetunde. So let's say we now have something inside of Yetunde, and we say get salary. So what data type do we have as the name here? Can anybody answer that?
The string.
Yes, here we have what? A number. Here we have a string. Then here we have an array, right? So
yes,
let's say get salary is going to be let's use an arrow function so that it does not have its own this context. So let's just say 2 plus 3 for simplicity. Sorry. So let's say whenever you have this inside of an object, that is when the value you're storing inside the property of an object is a function, then that's basically a method. Do you get the point? Then you can now carry out the side effect or whatever execution, whatever value that or action that this function will take. You can carry it out on the object itself. Do you get the point? but technically you are storing the value of a function inside of the property of an object. And whenever you see that kind of relationship, when the value of an object has the type of a function, then it is a method, whether you created it by yourself or it comes built in, like what we have inside of the prototype here. Or what you have inside the prototype, as long as all of this f depicts the fact that they are functions, and then they are all methods that you can actually apply on the, what's it called, you get the point. There are methods that you can apply on, maybe if it's an array method, you apply it on an array. If it's an object method or a string method, you apply it on a string. So ultimately, it's a property of that particular element, but it gives you some actions that you can perform on that element. Does that make sense now? Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Hello?
Hello, good evening. Can we all hear?
Me, I can hear. Good evening, sir.
All right. Good evening. Good evening, friend.
Sorry, guys.
Good evening.
Sorry?
Yeah, good evening. Sorry for keeping us some minutes late.
No.
Okay. How's
Okay, guys, sorry. That's the other meeting I said I was supposed to join. So, okay, so that's it basically. So let me just show you the other array methods. Let me just leave a message. Okay, so okay, so but you understand what I mean by methods now, right? Though what you guys said is actually was correct, but this just kind of, I'm trying to give you a context as to the applicability of methods, and I think we did that before a couple of weeks ago. Just that I needed to kind of give you a refresher. So that's it. So we have shift that technically what's that? We have shift and it removes the first element. So I said it is the opposite of what's it called? Pop. So other than shift, we also have a couple of others. Okay. So we have a couple of others. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yeah?
So I have something to say.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
If I'm thinking straight, methods are more defined functions. Just like we have functions that we can operate mainly with, what should I say? Logics. It's more modified using methods.
Okay, let me go over it again. When you have an object, you store property value pair inside your object. So you will have property on the left hand side, which is the name of the value, right? Then on the right hand side, you will have the value ascribed to that property. So you could have an object that is maybe my person or a person object. Then it will have a name, and the value of the name can be John. It will have an age. The age can be 27, right? So a method basically is when the value that you are storing inside of the property of an object is a function. Whatever the function does, it doesn't matter. As long as it is a function, then it's a method. So it could be a useless method, and it could be a very useful method, and that you can use to do some very interesting things. Does that make sense? So it's not really about what the function does. It's the fact that what you store in the property is a function. That's what makes it a method. So if it's a function, it qualifies to be a method as long as it's a part of an object. And then as you go on, you realize that technically every single thing in JavaScript is an object. So every single, even functions are objects, arrays are objects, and every single thing is an object in JavaScript. So does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. So here I will show you another array method, and that is fill. So here the array method, not this kind of fill. So let's say we have fill and the fill says hello. So here's what happens when you do fill actually it changes all the elements inside of the array. You get the point. It changes all the elements to the arguments that you passed into the the method, the fill method. Does that make sense? So the fill method.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. So
But what if the array is empty?
what if the array is,
Like just as we
yeah, if
like
the,
there are no elements inside the array.
yeah, since it basically replaces what you already have. So if there are no elements, it returns the original array. There's nothing to replace.
Okay.
And
That's
then,
like 0 times 100 equals to 0.
yeah, that kind of thing. So and then you can also specify the index you want to start from. Let's say you want to start from the index of 3. So it does that from 3 up to the end. Then we can also specify from the index of 3. Then we also specify an ending index. So it does it from 3 to 5. And every other thing remains the same. Does that make sense? So always remember, if you are using VS Code or maybe any similar text editor, once you hover on top of a method, it kind of gives you a summary of what the method does. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So I've shown you includes. So the other ones I'll be showing you now are the ones that okay. I think there's one other one I would show you, and I would want you to actually look at most of these things at your own time. So let's say we have character at -2. So you can see what it does now. What it does basically is it's kind of, when you see we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. So at -2 should technically so let me hold on. I think that's deprecated, so that I don't think that's so the other one I'll do is find.
Yes, I think to take you back.
Hello, okay.
But can we set an on the fill? Because while I was like doing the assignments that they gave us, I was checking like how to use fill. And I was seeing the examples that they gave on MDN. I didn't really understand. I was seeing how they replace, like, they were replacing elements.
Okay, for instance, let's say we want to replace 3, let's say we want to replace 3.
Yes, sir.
Definitely the counting an array starts from 0. So we have 0, 1, 2. So 3 is at the index of 2. So let's say we want to replace 3 with 33 as a string. So we'll do 33 and then we target the index of 2. So you can see when we target the index of 2, actually it starts from the index of 2, but it runs all the way to the end. So what we can do is we start from the index of 2 and we ask it to end at the index of 3. So it doesn't affect any other number, it only affects 2. Affects 3 rather. Does that make sense? So it will only affect what's between. It won't touch the last index that is specified. It's just going to go as far as what's between this and this. And since it's just 1, it's just going to target what's on this index and leave every other thing. So if you make this 4, it targets 2 elements and leaves every other one. But if you don't specify an end index, it's going to run all the way till the end. So this way you should be able to target any element inside of the array. You can target the 6th element if there is anything like the 6th element, and then it's just going to be like that. So you basically have replaced that. Does that make sense? Okay.
So if I can get it correctly, the first number in a string is what we are using to
so
what we are adding. Then the second number, which is this 6, is the index.
Is the index
of, so we are going to. So that means, for example, now, please can you take your mouse away from? Okay. For example, now 1 is an index of 0, 2 is an index of 1, 3 all the way to 7. So
I'm not doing 3, I'm doing 6 to 7. So if I do 3 to 7, which is what you're
okay.
Do you get the point? So here, this second number in the middle is the index, and the index could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as it does not exceed the last index of the array. You get?
Yes,
and then the second number is the.
What is the essence of 7?
Go on.
I said, sir, what is the essence of the 7?
Okay, here's what the 7 means. 2 is what? The beginning index. Okay. This is where you want the field to start from. So if you don't specify 7, it's going to fill all the way to the end of the array. So it starts from the index of 2 and goes to the end, through to the end. So the other parameter or the other argument you're passing in is where you want it to stop. So if I pass in 2, that means I'm saying start filling at the index of 2 and stop at the index of 3. So it doesn't fill 3, it fills 2, and when it gets to 3, that's where the order stops. So 3 will display, the index of 3 will display just fine. It only affects the index of 3. So if I do from 2 to 4, it fills 2, it fills 3, but it excludes 4. It doesn't include the last index. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so it's
sir.
just like splice, yeah, like slice rather. Do you get the point?
Yes,
You know when we
sir.
did
So it doesn't take anything away from the number. It's just like it's just going to occupy that. It's going to replace that former index.
yeah, up to the ending index that you specify. If there's any room between the two, it will travel as much as the last index you specified. But if it's just one character jump, then if it just needs to jump one step, then it excludes every other thing. But if you don't specify an ending index, which is the fourth argument, then it will go all the way to the end. So it's just like splice. Remember when we did splice? Okay, it starts copying the array from the index of 2 and stops at the index of 4, but it does not include, what's that? Okay, this returns a new array, so let's just do new. Remember, this creates a copy of the array. Basically, it doesn't modify the original array, and that's why the original array still persists. Does that make sense? So you can see now that it just takes 3 and 4, and that's what you have. It does not include the index of 4. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It does not include 5, which is at the index of 4, but it only takes 3 and 4. It excludes the last index. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's the same thing that fill does. Just that fill takes 3 arguments. So all of these things we pass into the function are arguments. And that's because by design, the function was designed to take in those arguments. So we have fill here, and you can see that the first parameter is expecting the value, of number. Then it's expecting a start number and then an end number. And then this is not just a number, it can also be, it can be anything. It could be a string as well. So I think this is a bulk, so it mustn't be a number. So it's just a value. Fill the array. The value you want to fill the array with is this value. It's not necessarily a type of number. So we also have, I think we have reverse here. So kind of just reverses the order of the array. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it reverses that, makes it 10, 9, 8, 7, 3, 2, 1, blah blah blah. So the other array methods that I have to show to you actually are a little bit more complex, because those ones don't just take in normal regular characters. They take in full expressions, and I'll just show you an example of one which is more like the simplest one. I'll show you, and then we call it a day from there. So let's say you have this methods array and you want to map. So here's what a map does, and a map is actually a higher order array method, and you don't have to worry yourself about what it does if you don't get it. So let's say this is for each element inside of the array, and I want to go over every element, and then what I want to do over every element is that I want to multiply every element by 2. So what it is going to do is, let me just say let's mapped array, and then we'll meet at this point tomorrow, because I know this is going to be so you can see it multiplies everything by 2. So 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. You can see it actually multiplies every single element by 2. Does that make sense? Hello. So remember when I taught you and don't worry too much about this. Basically, I'm going to go over them because these are called higher order array methods, but they are also array methods. So that's why I'm talking about them while we are talking about array methods. So we also have filter, and I think this is the last one I'll do. So filter, we can filter where element modulus 2, and like I said, all these ones taking expressions is equal to 0. And what this does is it just returns all the even numbers. So you can see how short this one is compared to when you did loop and did this one. So all of those things you did with the loop, like that massive loop, you can actually do it with one line. Can you see that? Hello. Hello?
So, yeah.
Yeah, don't worry. I know you understand. You won't understand the last two I did. Okay, let's just leave it on online 813. Or does anybody understand what I just did now? Not understand, but more like kind of just have an idea of, okay, this is what the map function did and this is what the filter function did. But don't worry, we'll go over that, let's say from tomorrow and not tomorrow, on Friday. So but from next week we'll actually start delving into document object model. I'll just cover a couple of things about objects, like the this keyword. There's something such as the this keyword in JavaScript, and it's something you also have to understand. So it's called this. So you might want to take a look at that at your own time. And then in order to be able to just consolidate all of these things, I'll try to create an assignment out of this stuff, and I want you guys to purpose with the IDM assignment I gave you concerning the array methods. I also want you to go and do your own research on array methods and give me a documentation of everything. Create a .md file on your Replit workstation and submit it so that I can take a look at it and see that. And then if you want to go as far as kind of giving an example of each one of them, it will also be very nice. So more like an array method, then you kind of put an example of how to use each one of them. I would appreciate that. Does that make sense, guys? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but
Yes,
everything
sir.
we did so far, I hope you understand everything we did so far.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's fine. So thank you very much, guys. I have another meeting to join now, so I have to just stop now. I won't believe it. I'm very, very late, about 20 minutes late into the meeting, but that's fine. I'll see you guys on Friday, and I'll drop the assignment. In case I forget, please remind me, because it's very easy to forget those kind of things. So thank you very much, guys. Or is there any question at this point? Hello? Any questions? Hello? Okay, that's fine. So thank you, guys. So I'll see you guys on Friday. Omiabi, you're welcome, and I hope you learned from the class. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, sir.
Okay, no problem. See you guys on Friday. So please try to, and then or maybe you can. Okay, you just I'll request for your email address so that I can add you to the Replit workstation. That's where the assignments are being done.
Okay, sir. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
That's what we
Up to 20 participants per session. Quiz
20.
questions.
20.
Yes, up to 20 participants per session. For this $17 per month.
No, come.
That $17 per month is the host. Then everybody will hop in, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that's even fair. I thought you said.
No, now I can't have 20 participants now.
No. I think
You think it could be more, right?
The trial version, yeah. So it will be more than 20 now.
Yes.
It will be more than 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are not to go for the $39.
Exactly.
Okay.
That one is up to 50 participants.
Up to how many?
Okay. So it's by the payment.
50.
It's by payment. Okay.
Mm-hmm. You can do it and you can solve free trial.
For the free trial, do you know how many people to show?
No, it will give that's the plan you pick that it will do. So this one
No,
is saying
only have free trial for the $17. So
You can't do free trial for 39 now for them. I remember the thing. I remember when I had to do it. The setup was taking so long that this is such a long Kahoot setup. Because I remember the finance was really annoying, very ungameable. And I think it's because they know. I think I ended up paying for one.
Mm-hmm.
It's because they know that people will typically need it for a one-off once in a while.
Yeah.
So if they make you able to use it, that once you won't come back. You just use their free trial. You probably use it till another 5 years.
Yeah.
So I guess our options would be pick one paid version, pay for it, use it.